Okay, hello, welcome back to the second lesson of the Android Beginners course. This is the last lesson was really all about the building blocks of Android applications. And for this lesson, we'll see a little bit about fragments, a little bit about recycler view. We learn what is material design and some useful patterns to apply this with like the recycler view. And we'll see also navigation. This is really important. We'll see the navigation drawer. That is one of the most used in material design. It's a really convenient way to actually use the navigation signs. It's hidden when it's not in use, so it doesn't obstruct the UI. But that's not the really only way to use the navigation. We know there is a menu in the action bar, and we can actually use that for navigation. There's no need for the navigation drawer, but there's also a couple other ways, like the bottom drawer, bottom navigation, and a tab layout. Those are just a couple ways to actually handle the navigation of an Android application. So let's start with today's presentation. Okay, so I want to talk about some of a design choice whenever we have to do an application, like activities and fragments. We have used activities in all the applications we have worked on, all the exercises. We know about activities, and in this lesson we learned about fragments. Right now we have used how we use them. They share many similarities. We use fragments to display the UI or handle events, like in the movie manager. We display the lists, and we can switch to the detail activity. They also have their life cycles. And these two things are quite similar. Activities were first. We already know that. But fragments were made as a way to support large screen devices. And the thing is that with large screen devices, there is quite some differences. But let's talk about that in a little while. I want to talk some of the differences, like what are some differences between an activity and a fragment? Well, we already know an activity is self-contained. It communicates to other activities with an intent, and it can be considered one screen or one layout, right? Activities have one defined purpose, while fragments, they are not their own things. Like, we can think about them as pieces of UI, and they are always contained in an activity. They have to communicate with other fragments and other activities through the main activity. And that's one of the disadvantages of if using a fragment instead of an activity, that it has a next step, another step of communication. Fragments were made as a modular approach to UI, right? So they are pieces of layouts and we can reuse. Okay, let's talk a bit about fragments. A fragment, as we already know, exists in an activity. One of the one of the advantages we have with this, we saw in the Movie Manager app that we can reuse menus for for many fragments. The navigation drawer works like that. We use many fragments with one drawer. We define the navigation drawer in the main activity, and then we use that for both fragments. A fragment controls a piece of the layout. This might not make much sense in a phone, right? The screens are very small and they are a little bit they can show too much content. But that's the thing, in large devices like tablets, there's a lot of space, so we can make use of that. We can make pieces of the layout and change them dynamically. Right. And those are the main characteristics of a fragment. They can be reused, are contained, and we can integrate them with an activity to reuse the assets of the activity, like the menus or anything that was defined in the activity. Okay. So let's talk about one app that uses fragments navigation. That's Gmail. We already know that Gmail is an email app, right? Google email application. And that application contains fragments for the different categories of the where you can sort your emails, like promotions, personal, or new emails. Gmail uses a navigation drawer and an action bar menu. And this is the thing about navigation. You're not limited to one type of navigation. You can mix and match navigation styles. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Gmail also has a flexible UI, and it has different layouts for tablets and phones. And this really showcases the purpose of a fragment. Fragments may look like just another thing that we put on top of an application if we're developing on a phone. But on a tablet, we can make layouts that really make sense. This is the navigation drawer that Gmail uses. This is the main activity showing the inbox of the email, right? You see, emails are divided in social, promotions, updates, and the primary inbox is the one that we are looking at in this screenshot. You can see on the top, there is the navigation drawer button, and there's also the search button. This is part of the action bar. So you can see they have two types of navigation in one application. And this is kind of the point of different navigations, that you can mix and match to really meet the needs of your application. And this is the detailed view. This works exactly like in our movie manager. We select an item from the list, and then we display the content on a new activity. But what happens on a tablet? In a tablet, we have much more space, and we can actually fit all these things on a single activity. You can see the use of fragments right here. Using the extra space of the tablet, you can accommodate the fragments so they make easier view, right? You can see on the left side, there's a compact menu with the different categories. But you can also open the navigation drawer on this. You have the list of emails, and then when you select one, instead of launching a new activity, we display it on the right side to make use of that extra space. So, what are some advantages of fragments? Well, as I said before, we can reuse the menus, and this is really advantage in developing, because if we didn't, we have the same piece of code declaring the menu and the actions of the menu in every one of our activities. Like if the movie manager used activities instead of fragments, we'll have two activities for both fragments, and we have to declare the menu, the navigation route on both of those activities. Instead of just swapping the content, we have a lot of extra code. Right? Another advantage is that we can support different devices, like tablets and phones. We can change the fragments are displayed when there's certain configuration or certain screen sizes. Maybe even the density of the screen, not the size. We can actually nest fragments one inside the other. Like we have a fragment and then we have a tab layout, and the tab layout uses fragments on all the tabs. So we have a fragment inside the tab layout inside a fragment. And in these cases, we have to use child fragment manager instead of support fragment manager, because it's child fragment manager is designed for this kind of nested layout. YouTube, the application, uses many navigation options. I have, like, here you can see, this is the view that you have when you select a channel. You have on the bottom, you have a bottom navigation, where you can see the most important categories. On top of that, there's a fragment, and the fragment has a tab layout. The tab layout contains the channel information, the main page, the videos, the information, and other important stuff about the channel. And on top of the activity, we still have the action bar, where you have the menu, you have the back bottom, and you have a search option, and you have the other options. There is a problem with this kind of approach. Well, yes, you can do this. You have to be very careful. Using nested fragments can lead to many bugs. A bug inside a tab, you will have a hard time finding out from where it comes from, because the activity will most likely throw the error. But you have to figure out which fragment, or maybe the fragment interactions are messing up and throwing unexpected results. So, what are some of these advantages? Fragments depend on a parent activity. It can't communicate freely with themselves or other activities. You have to keep their state and the backstack of fragments manually. This is actually done automatically by the system for activities, but not for fragments. And you can launch a fragment from an external application. Like, when you click a link from a Google search and it's to a YouTube video, you can open that link with the YouTube application instead of the Explorer. That's the same thing. Like, you can launch an activity from another activity, but you can do this with fragments. how do fragments communicate? As I said before, they depend on their parent activity. They use interfaces and callbacks. Like you declare an interface on a fragment and you have to implement that in the parent activity so it can handle the result of the event. Like select an item, like you select a movie as a favorite, or you're making a to-do list and you want to declare an important task, or maybe even adding items to a shopping cart. These are some examples of when two types of fragments might need to interact. Basically sending data between a fragment. Another example is like in the Gmail application, you can imagine you're using a tablet and you want to delete one of the emails, but that's the email you are actually reading on the right side of the application. Then you have to delete the email and then you have to inform the other fragment that the view has changed, right? Then that way you have to have communication between fragments, and that is a bit complicated. Well, not complicated, but it's an extra step from using activities. This is how you actually use interfaces in fragments. This example is in the Android developer side. If you want to read more about it, is the fragment communication section. The important thing is that you have to declare an interface that has the methods that you want to use, right, in the main activity. And you have to declare a callback of the type of the interface. Then when it's attached to an activity, you have to make sure the activity uses the callback if it's really important to the functionality. You can see in the try, we're actually trying to bind the callback from the activity. And if it doesn't use the callback, then the activity can use this fragment. So we throw an error. Then all the way to the bottom, we see the override method. This is the method that we'll have to implement in the main activity. This is the onList item click. It just selects an item and send it to the main activity so we can do something with that item. And this is how we do in the activity. We have the activity on article selected. This is it's the function, right? You see in the interface there's a method, and that method is the one that we're implementing here. So what's the deal? We can use a mix of fragments and activities, but there's no guidelines on how to do this. We can actually make an activity only application or a fragment only application. But there's a problem. You see, if the activity becomes too complex, we'll see if the fragments need to communicate, then we'll add an interface for each one of them. And this one is empty, but imagine if the methods are really long or really complicated, then the size of the activity will grow and grow. And the other problem is that instead of being like focused on one thing, then many things that don't have anything to do with one another will be on the same place, and maybe their methods are similar. It will get confusing really fast. It's not, well, you can do it, but I don't think it's a very good idea to actually use only fragments or activities. So what's the ideal approach? As I said, there is no ideal approach. You can do it however you want, but this is the way I like. You have an activity that encompass an action or a set of actions, and you have the fragments that um, have the actions required, like an activity that handles displaying the data, and we have fragments that fetch the data, display the data, and maybe allow the user to select data. And then we communicate between the activities. I like this approach because it will keep the activities relatively simple, and they will keep the functionality relevant to one another. Like then we could use an activity that displays a user profile, for example, and the data they have, like their personal information or their in or the items they have selected or recommendation or stuff like that, and then we communicate between the activities. So this is how I like to work in the applications. You group fragments by their function, like if they have related functions or they will use the same menus or stuff like that, you group them and use them in a single activity. That way, it keeps activities simple, avoids the unrelated code. Like you won't have a function that works for a fragment and then 10 other fragments that don't have anything to do with that. And most importantly, you avoid switching icons and menus and all that stuff. Okay, finally, we'll talk about some exercises of the lesson. These exercises are accessibility and styles. But I want to talk about some material design choices that you can do to make these kind of exercises easier. Like when designing a UI, you have the content descriptors. The content descriptors are an accessibility function that works for TalkBack. Basically, it reads what the views are trying to say, right? So there's no really need to use this on textual or views that have text. Like a text view already has a text, and TalkBack can read this text view and not the content. Um, but it can read an image, right? Or an image button. So these kind of things are the ones that we want to add content descriptors to. The other things, the edit texts and the titles and stuff like that, don't need the content descriptors because they already have text. And the other exercise, styling views. How do we know how to style a view? How do we know what colors work or like the sizes and stuff like that? How do we know the colors don't mix with the background and they become unreadable, right? Well, that's part of where material design comes in. Material design is used through Android a lot. And it has a website with a lot of guidelines and a lot of stuff that we can use to make better UI and better accessibility because it has a lot of thought into those things. Like one of those things is the color. You can find this tool in the material design website, and it allows you to pick colors for your activity, and it will let you know how the colors work with the text, and it will even show you a preview of the colors when using an application, like the primary color or a darker color or accent and stuff like that. This is the accessibility view of the color tool. You select a color and you can see that the color tool shows you how the text will look on those colors, and it even gives you the the codes, the hexadecimal codes of the colors, so you can add this to your application. But the important part for this exercise is that you can see the opacity that you need to have in order to actually read the code, the, the fonts for this type of colors. And this is really good for accessibility. It keeps you from like trial and error trying to figure where it looks right and where it doesn't. The next thing we know about text input layout, recycler view. Those two are components for material design. Even the navigation router is a component for the material design. And the material design page has a section for the components. You can see a lot of implementation. You can see the source, well, not the source code, but you can see a lot of functions and the methods, how they interact, and all that kind of good stuff. You can see you can even see the design guidelines. Like they tell you the sizes that buttons have to be, or like the font that you have to use in a recycler view and stuff like that, like the card view, the margins that you the margins that you like to use, and the how to use them together with other material components. And this is a really good source if you ever wanted to research these components, or maybe you just want to see more functionality. These are great. The final thing is icons. Material design already includes a lot of icons. And we can use icons in our menus or in our buttons, and they are sometimes the icons that the system has, they are not appropriate to our application. Maybe they are too dark or too light, or maybe they are too small. And sometimes they don't even look good with one another. And that's where material icons come in. Well, we already saw some material icons in the tip calculator app. Remember, we download them and we add them to the application. What I wanted to show, there's actually a plugin for this. Like, remember the butter knife? We use a plugin to generate the injections automatically. There's a plugin that is called Android Material Design Icon Generator. This is a really cool plugin because it does the downloading part, and it actually adds the icons to your project for you. This is a really good resource. It already has all the icons that are available on the material design side, and it will add them for you. It's really much more convenient than downloading the icons one by one and then adding them to your project. Well, that's it for the lesson 2 conference. I hope you're watching this, that you learn something, or that you are like to research some of your own things, that you learn something to apply to an Android application. And of course, if there's any problems, or you like to ask some more questions or a discussion, we can always talk in the course forums. Well, thanks, and see you in the next session.